Oh, imagine it stopped recording. Ooh.
That's why we have a backup.
Welcome back to episode 2 of the TNT Real Estate Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Tyler Peroni. I'm sitting right beside my co-host, Tanya Vandenberg. Today we're going to delve into a little bit of, property investment and how to find your first investment property. So this is going to be a more beginner kind of stage. It's your first, whether it's a house or a duplex or some other type of investment. But this is kind of the beginning stages that are going to build you up to buy your second, third, fourth, or 100th property. These are the kind of the fundamentals. So we're going to kind of start with our, personal investment experiences and move on to what mistakes we made and, what to look out for all those beginner investments.
Yeah, so what we're hoping to do today is really to give you an idea of what you need to start the investment process. So Tyler, let me start by asking you, what made you choose your own personal investment property?
So my first investment properties, we talked about this last time, but it was my single family house that I currently own. It was the stage in my life where myself and my girlfriend at the time wanted to move out, wanted to buy our first property, but we didn't necessarily need a whole house. And so we looked at a few New Sudbury bungalows because we knew we wanted to be in New Sudbury. But basically what the factors were that made us, purchase that property was, two separate entrances. And, for those that know New Sudbury bungalows, they have the back door that usually have the stairs right on the back side of the house. So it's super easy conversion to an apartment. And so that was the big thing. We went to see it once. We went back the next day just to double check on a few things, and everything was set up. The plumbing was downstairs. We already had a bathroom and a bedroom downstairs. And so when we purchased the property, we built the kitchen downstairs and built one more, basically a wall with a door, which was the second bedroom. And that was that. It was just, we bought it in June, did the renovations during the summer, and then had it rented out for September 1st for the new Cambrian College students.
So you chose that first property because you wanted to live in that neighborhood and wanted to live in that home.
Yeah.
Now, have you changed how you evaluate your other properties since purchasing that one? That was kind of a house hack.
Yeah. So that one was definitely a lot more emotional purchases than my next few purchases. It was where we're going to live. So we didn't look at the numbers. We just wanted the basement apartment to, pay for a little bit of the mortgage, which it ended up doing. But there was almost no numbers involved in that purchase, which is basically the opposite of what I do now. It's like very heavy on the numbers. If the numbers work, then I buy it, and if they don't work, I don't buy it.
Yeah. That's very similar. So similar to my situation.
Okay.
So the first the first investment property we actually bought it to live in it as well. Yeah. So for us, the main factor was the location. We had 2 little kids at the time, and we wanted to live in sort of like that Wembley area, the old hospital neighborhood. And so this duplex came up on Kingsmount, and the basement apartment was empty at the time. It was a perfect place for us to move to as that sort of next step investment. We lived there for like a year, and then we rented out both units afterwards. But similar to you, like, we didn't really look at the number or consider the numbers. We might have looked at like what our mortgage payment was going to be, and certainly making sure that it could carry itself if and when we moved out of the property. But definitely the focus changes now as more of a pure investor, not a place you're going to move into. I mean, location I think is still very key, but numbers and maybe potential for those numbers to increase is one of the factors that we look at for new investment properties now.
Do you think there's, well, obviously when I'm looking at a property, I look at the building itself and then the numbers. Is there anything more than that kind of you look for? Is there any red flags that that you always look for, whether it's
Yeah.
in the numbers or in the property itself?
Yeah, like, I mean, the red flags can sometimes be the numbers themselves, right? If the numbers look a little too good to be true, you definitely want to validate those rents and make sure those rents are accurate. And then you also, one of the biggest red flags is, let's say if a tenant has just moved into one of the units, they're paying probably a very high rent, or, you know, maybe a little above market rent, or at that sort of peak. And you haven't really seen how they live in the unit yet, right? And you haven't really demonstrated that they've been paying the rent on time, that kind of thing. So you always want to make sure that you can get a tenant acknowledgement and know how long those tenants have been in that property.
Yeah.
And just make sure you're not inheriting somebody who's maybe just kind of slipped in to get a high number or high rent,
Yeah.
but maybe isn't a good quality tenant for that building.
Yeah, that's one. It's definitely one thing that we look for when we're evaluating properties, especially for our clients. When you see, a 10 cap on a building, so obviously it's producing a lot of income, but all three tenants are brand new and they're all paying $500 to $600 more than what they should be paying. That's a huge red flag. It's obviously nice to see those numbers, and it gives you a little bit more cash flow than the other ones, but it's
Sometimes that cash flow kind of comes at an expense though, right?
Absolutely,
Like it can
absolutely.
be very difficult to get rid of a problematic tenant if they stop paying rent. So you want to just make sure that they've been paying rent at least for a couple of months,
Yeah.
and that they're well vetted prior to your client purchasing the property.
Yeah.
So have you seen any sort of other red flags, or have you seen any problems with properties that you've personally purchased? Or
I guess my story would be on one of my triplexes that I own. We looked at the property, and it was our third purchase. We knew that the basement, it looked a little damp, but we didn't realize how much water it was actually leaking in. So we're on last summer was our second dig up of the foundation to fix the leaking foundation. So we're about, probably $25,000 into, fixing that problem. So that was a little bit, it's hard to tell though, when you're looking at these properties, especially depending on the season, it's hard to tell if it's leaking. That's why everybody always says it's nice to house hunt in the rain, because you can kind of see those leaks as they go through. But I think that's something that's kind of very important, is to go past the due diligence period and just, or I guess when you're in that due diligence period, look at everything in the building. I think that's probably one of the most important pieces that I could say. But red flags for me, I don't like any structural issues. I'm what you would call a boring investor. I want to deal with cosmetics and cosmetics only. I don't want to be doing additions. I don't want to be fixing foundations or, bowing roofs. I want it to be nice and simple. I want to change cabinets. I want to paint. I want to do flooring, and that is basically it.
Yeah. One of the things that I, and my husband especially, his issue is with retaining walls. So we always want to try to avoid a place that has maybe a huge retaining wall, or retaining wall that looks like it's in a bit of disrepair. Even when, let's say, that retaining wall is not your issue as a property owner, maybe it's a neighbor's retaining wall and their responsibility to deal with it. It's just one of those things that is difficult to deal with, creating that relationship with the neighbor right off the bat and saying, hey, you got to fix this, is never really a good way to start. So we typically try to avoid places that have retaining walls that are substantial and maybe needing repair. But maybe if it's a small retaining wall, and certainly in our area, Kingsmount, Wembley area, there's a lot of those properties that are sort of sloped, and they do have retaining walls. So it's important to...
And it's interesting how there's the retaining wall is somebody's until it's in disrepair and it needs to be repaired. Then it's nobody's. It's absolutely nobody's. So that's definitely a big one as well.
So do you think, Tyler, that new investors, so someone who's going to buy their first income property, should they focus more on the cash flow, or should they focus on appreciation?
I think it's a bit of both. Obviously, new investors, typically they're pretty strapped for cash. They're getting into their first one. They're putting a lot into it. a lot as in like the percentage of what they actually have, especially the younger investors. I think cash flows is kind of key, but it's not everything. I think when you have a good area, you need to be able to look, 10, 20, 30 years back and see how much it has appreciated since that stage and where it's going to go next. I think that is, at the end of the day, your bread and butter in real estate is appreciation. Cash flow is always nice, but I would say it's not everything.
Yeah. I think cash flow is crucial to sort of like make sure you can maintain the bills, maintain the property, and keep it for the long term.
Yeah.
You do also get sort of a natural appreciation with the appreciation of rents too. So that's kind of nice. We always look for a place where there may be 1 or 2 tenants where there's going to be a bit of a turnover, because then you're going to have that appreciation with that rental income. We never want to buy something where you're never moving people out who don't want to move. But if you see that someone's already, given their notice, or they're at the end of their term in school and they're going to be moving on, you will naturally get that appreciation for the building value by increasing the rents from one tenant to the next and keeping it within the market allowance for rent as well.
Yeah.
So how should a first-time home buyer or a first-time investor decide how much to spend, how big of a purchase to go?
Yeah, so that's going to be different for everybody, right? So I think it's very important for people to first decide how much capital, how much money am I going to put to this property right off the get-go. So including your down payment, which is probably going to be 20% or more, depending on your situation. And then planning for contingencies too, right? Is there going to be a new roof repair needed to be done in the first 5 years? Are you going to need to do maybe a little waterproofing in the basement? Is there going to be a repair in one of the units before you have a turnover? So planning for that, having your down payment available and knowing what your budget is to buy is one thing, but then also having the cash available to do the repairs that are necessary and the repairs that you want to do as soon as you take the property, that's really going to determine your purchase price that you can afford it and want to afford. So I think it's really important that you meet with somebody, a mortgage advisor who's very much in tune with investment properties and maybe leveraging some of your other assets to purchase these investment properties.
Yeah.
And a realtor, of course, to help you evaluate the numbers and decide where are you going to fit within your budget that's going to be the best opportunity for you.
When the mortgage broker tells you, this is the budget you're working with, then you go back to your realtor and say, this is my budget, where am I buying? And then we'll be able to tell you exactly the areas of the city that are, accessible to you, and what kind of return you can expect in those properties.
Yeah. So we were talking about some of the tools also that you can use being a first-time investor. Definitely there's a lot of apps that, we use and we recommend to our clients. But what do you think about maybe networking as an investor, a first-time investor, and the value of, networking and having those professionals to help you?
Well, I think networking, it can be a face-to-face thing, but it also can be an online thing now. I think social media is huge, and there's so many of us that are putting out amazing content, especially for real estate investing. And now, like when I bought my first property years ago, there wasn't much Canadian content, but especially these younger guys, and I'm thinking about the Rise Network there, and there's all sorts of Canadian real estate podcasts. There is a library of information that you could just go through and watch and learn about different strategies, and it's amazing to do. And then you connect with these people on social media and watch their content daily and see what they're buying daily and see what their kind of mindset is. I think that is key. Obviously, the face-to-face, getting in front of your landlord groups locally, I think that's a fantastic part of it as well. But I think social media, just watching the content, going through, connecting with these people, DM them, ask them kind of questions, I think that is kind of key, especially in today's day.
Yeah, and I think the key is to not be afraid to reach out to people too. Reach out to people who who have done these investments, people on these forums like you mentioned, get their recommendations for professionals. Like, it's always good to have a good plumber, electrician, and a few other handy types of people on your roster to, in case, there's always some plumbing leak in the middle of the night on a Sunday. But yeah, so don't be afraid to ask people for help and ask people for their contacts and networking and whatnot, because it's a great way to build resources and to learn from one another.
So what do you think is your first time investor? What do you think the ideal property is for, obviously it's going to change from person to person, but what do you think is the ideal kind of first investment for somebody?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it's going to depend, like you said, on sort of your life circumstances and factors. I think your first investment property, like a house hack type thing, is awesome for people who are okay with roommates, okay with living with people in a secondary unit. You can get away with a lower down payment, free up some of your capital to do other investments. So I think that's a great opportunity. But if someone, is maybe more established and they've got a family and don't necessarily want to move their family into a place, I think, a duplex or triplex is probably the easiest. Start off with 2 or 3 tenants. You got to sort of manage their personalities and make sure they all get along. But a smaller building is a great place to start as a first-time investor, and then you can sort of build your way up as you kind of build the tolerance and build a bit of extra net worth.
Build the foundation with duplexes, triplexes, and then once you get a little bit of experience in those, you can make the jump to the commercial residential side, which is 5 units and over. So
yeah, awesome. I think this is pretty good for our very second podcast. Very first one on investments, investment focus.
Absolutely.
So thank you everybody for joining us here today at the TNT podcast. And if you have any questions, you know how to reach out to us, and we'll be in touch.